know we talked about it earlier this week too, but Mizzou and Faroe Field is cool, but you got to think that 8-man football would maybe want to get out of being in Columbia, at least maybe in the future for the state title game too.
I think they would if they could. I think that's a Misha thing.
Well, yeah, but I
Unfortunately,
would think there's enough, maybe not pressure, but you would think that they could say, "Hey, can we get this moved at some point to kind of be more accommodating to 8-man football?"
I thought Chillicothe was a great state title game as far as the environment. Now I don't think they'd want to do it at a high school field, but like Devin talked about, both of us on the same page for once. William Jewell, I think, would be a great one. Still a nice, it's a nice college, nice field, and it still has that small environment that I think would fill out fairly well with 8-man fans.
Yeah, and the Chillicothe one was unique too because you had Southwest Livingston just down the road and North Andrew who travels really well. So that was just a great atmosphere, and you had a lot of the local teams who, yeah, it's a hour drive to Southwest Livingston instead of a 2-hour drive or 2.5-hour drive to Columbia. Makes a difference to get some of the other local people to watch the game, kind of deal. I think this should not just be improvement for 8-man. I think the bottom 2 or 3 classes in Missouri could benefit from this in general. I understand wanting to play the class 4, 5, 6 game at Columbia. Kind of deal. There's more of a central location there between the Kansas City and St. Louis schools. But I think the smaller classes, I think, could really benefit from either moving it to a William Jewell or a Central Missouri, or if they could somehow work out a deal with the new women's soccer stadium here in Kansas City, that would be also a smaller atmosphere that would be a more energetic atmosphere because you're just putting people in a smaller confined space there with it. I think would help a lot with that. And I think it's just, I get you want the kids to play on a bigger stage kind of deal with that, and it makes it feel big. I know talking to people in the past kind of deal like, yeah, playing at Mizzou was huge, especially kids who are Mizzou fans kind of growing up kind of deal, getting to play on the turf there. It's kind of a cool experience, but also you're playing in a state championship game. I'm not sure how much cooler you need it to be kind of deal. Let the environment be better and have the crowd be better and closer to the field. I think improves the game in general with that kind of deal. So I would like it seeing not just the 8-man game, because I know in the past, some of the 8-man coaches have been like, we don't want to be the redheaded stepchild that's pushed to the side at a different location away from the 11-man stuff. I think if you did that for the smallest 3 classes, kind of deal with that, and move them to this another location and have all the football one weekend for the bottom 4 classes, whatever it is, with the bottom 3, 11-man and 8-man together, I think you would just get a better overall experience for all of those smaller type schools.
Yeah, because I mean, when we go to Faroe Field and we look at it, just down there, there's a good following. I mean, even last year in the Class 1 for East Buchanan, it looked like there's a lot of people there. But if you were sitting up in that press box, everybody looks like an ant, obviously, but it just looks like it's not packed. It's loud down there, but it's not aesthetically pleasing. It doesn't give you that thousands and thousands of people, and it just. I mean, it's kind of like the Edward Jones Dome was, right? I mean, it was cool to have the kids play in the dome. They seem to love it. But you look around and you're like, there's a lot of empty seats. And, I mean, I don't know how much the kids care about that part. I know some coaches and 8-man would like to have it not in Columbia. They would, have it somewhere else too. But I don't know. That's just maybe it's because we're in, the media part of it where the photos, the videos, and we're like, it just doesn't look right. It doesn't look like
it would just be louder if you had 3,000 people in a 17,000 stadium instead of 3,000 in an 80,000 seat stadium. It just makes a aesthetically difference in there, and you're closer to the other team. Kind of deal with that. It just feels different. Kind of deal with that, and especially if the kids are so used to playing these small class, 8-man, small class 1, class 2 fields where the fans are 10 feet away from the field in some cases. We see that in some of the fields, so it's like everything is so confined in the regular season games, and you get to that game and everything is so far away from the field. Kind of deal with that. It's a big difference, I think, for that, and I think it'd be interesting to play it in something that's a little bit less huge than Faroe Field. There is, if you want to do a Jewel, a UCM, even a Missouri Western, it's a little far west at that point, I think there. But I think there's some nice facilities in D2 football in Missouri that you could definitely utilize going forward with it.
Well, what I like about the idea of that new soccer stadium is you can actually paint the field to be an 8-man field. Because the other thing that kind of looks weird is covering this 8-man game on a 100-yard field where the only thing telling you it's 8-man is the yard markers. And like you said, I don't know. I guess I haven't really talked to the kids. I don't know if they care so much about the fans, because Fairfield Field, it's a nice stadium, especially with all they've done. So I don't know if that for them is enough. I don't. I know that I think the problem with the coaches is just Columbia's way out there, away from basically all the 8-man schools, and so I think that's part of it. For the bigger classes, it kind of makes sense. You have people coming from the east, west, meet right in the middle. 8-man's just a little different. I don't know exactly why they all have to be at the same location. That's a question for Misha, but
well, and I think there were 8-man coaches. It used to be before you'd have the 11-man games at a central location, and the 8-man game was at that time. There's only like 20 teams there, and they're mostly Northwest Missouri, so it'd be at Northwest Missouri State or it'd be at Missouri Western kind of deal. And there were coaches at the time who fought to have the game be with the 11-man school, so it would be at the same location. So there was that thought for many years with that. So I don't want to go against some of the coaches who thought like that at the time kind of deal, but I think we can also learn and adapt kind of deal. And we tried this for a long time, and I know there were years they played in St. Louis with everybody else, and it would be North Hager Stanberry, who are, 15, 20 miles apart, and they're driving 6 hours to play a state championship game. So it was always kind of interesting when that kind of happened with it. It's a little different now because you have some teams that could make the state championship game out of Northwest Missouri, but I think you can find a central location for 8-man kind of deal in that Warrensburg, Kansas City area.
And the other part where you talk about, Devin, my brother's senior year, North Andrew went to state. They were playing at 9 a.m. in St. Louis.
Mm-hmm.
That's awful, right? You're getting up at 5 a.m. wake up call, probably. You're right across from the stadium, but you're going from playing either Friday nights or Saturday afternoons in the postseason, maybe, to 9 a.m. kickoff or 10 a.m. kickoff.
On a Friday?
It was. Yeah.
And I know that's the biggest thing because the 8-man game has to be first because they have to do the field a different way kind of deal. So the 8-man game has to be first. And I know last year I wasn't very happy they had to move the game to Thursday night before. I thought it was kind of like, hey, they're still kind of putting the separation thing. But after going to the game last year and seeing its own Thursday night spotlight kind of deal with it, I kind of liked it a little bit better because the kids were playing at as you said, a normal game time kind of deal with that. You're finishing under the lights for a state championship game. That was kind of cool with that same sort. So I almost kind of hope they keep it like that just because I think it's a better way to display the game, kind of deal with it. And I think it does make it easier if they want to in the future separate the big and small classes, kind of deal with that, and maybe do 2 locations. You could do that easier as well because you wouldn't have to try to cram 5-6 games into 2 days, kind of deal with that. You could have a couple games per day, and you could have better time slots for each of those games instead of trying to fit a game at 11, then a game at 2, then a game at 5. Kind of, it just makes it harder, I think, to fit all those games in one weekend. I know it's probably more work for the people who work the events, but I think we can do it better for the kids and also the fans trying to take off time to get over there as well. Because trying to get over to Columbia or something for a 9 a.m. state championship game is difficult for some people with that, and they want to see their kids play one last time, kind of deal for a state championship. So.
All right, let's move on to the poll for this week. It's tightening up a little bit toward the top, I think. I don't have last week's in front of me, but North Andrew at 1 with 73 points, Albany now at 2 with 68 points, Archie at 3 with 65. Then you have Platte Valley 4, Drexel 5, Worth County 6, East Atchison 7, tied with Oric at 7, North Shelby 9, and tie at 10 with King City and Lockwood. I think Albany's earned that number 2. You can even argue maybe they have a right to maybe think they're the number 1 team in the state, too, at this point, just based off the 2 wins they've had the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, Albany probably has the best resume, and if you would go by kind of the old school BCS college football kind of deal, their big wins are bigger than anybody else's big wins to this point. But if you look at those 2 wins, they are both 2-point wins in games that could have gone either way for it. It's not like they went absolutely dominated both those games. They were down 2 scores to Platte Valley in the second half when Platte Valley had lost their best player at that point. Platte Valley still went up 2 scores. Credit to Albany for coming back and winning that game, but it's not like they won those games, but they weren't like we were by far the best team in both those games versus the top 5 teams and kind of coin flip games. North Andrew, they've been dominant pretty much all year. I know they have some tougher games coming up here, so we'll find out when they play in Albany and Worth County They got Stanbury this week, so I'm curious to see how they go through this back half of their schedule. And then Archie, they had a tough game week 1 versus Lockwood, versus a good opponent. Good opponent there. They took care of business there. They had a stretch in their schedule that was weaker. I think they started to play down their competition a little bit. LeBlanc gave them a little bit of a wake-up call at first quarter and a half, and then once they kind of settled in and kicked into gear, they kind of flexed their muscles as well going forward. They played a team that could punch back just a little bit there compared to their earlier schedule. So I think those 3 teams are up there, and I think at this point, Platte Valley, Worth County, they've proven they're both top contenders. And Drexel, I've seen Drexel because I look at all the voters when they come in. I think over the last couple of weeks, them post-Coffee hadn't been the toughest schedule, but I think we just wanted to see what they would look like without him kind of deal and make sure they didn't just fall off a complete cliff without him. And I think we've got a little more trust in Drexel the last couple of weeks just because they've taken care – they know what they're supposed to do kind of deal. There wasn't a whole lot of drop-off that we've seen so far. They got Archie this week, so that's a big test for them to kind of see where they would rank in that top 5 to 6 teams.
Yeah, I mean, I've watched Albany the last 2 weeks. They're a good team. They are. And proven that they're kind of in that top 5 range. Also, they could have gone 0-2 the last 2 weeks. So we'll see. Like you said, they get North Andrew. They get a chance to prove it once again. But for me, and some of the voters, we had this discussion over resume, and some people for that's important. For me, it's kind of what I've seen from you, and the opponent's kind of important, but not the main focus for me. North Andrew, they just don't have many weaknesses, and for a team that was already dominant, you add Dawson Eyechainer back, and suddenly Braxton Linville is throwing for 280 yards again because that relationship, and Gunnar Lawrence is a great athlete, a good receiver. They don't have that, and really they haven't had to throw the ball. But that's not only that, but just the defensive player he is. Because at secondary, if they had a weakness early on, it was back there. Because they had one solid corner and another kid that was, great kid, not a great player. And now you replace him with Eyechainer, who had 160 tackles last year, and just a great defensive player. You had that, and you have Andrew Goff playing at linebacker, Chittum at defensive line, just a massive defensive line. So that defense is rock solid. Offense is the same way. Hayden Ecker is probably the best running back in the state. He just doesn't – the opponents are tougher, and he just doesn't have to carry the ball like a Jackson Miller or Braxton Gibson. He's averaging 12 yards a carry. If you gave him those carries that you're giving Jackson, he'd probably be up there as well. And they proved that. Now, St. Joe Christian struggling, but they scored 86 points, and Hayden Ecker didn't play. So that's what I see with them, is they're just not really a weakness. And so that's why they've been one for me. Archie, man, they're just explosive, and they have playmakers everywhere. We will see. I think this week will actually be a better test than, say last week, just because those teams know each other so well. And, Chuck's a great coach, but if anyone knows how to handle Archie, it's Dean. And they still have guys on offense. That's why, for me, they haven't really moved. They've stayed right where I thought they've been. And, that's a team that maybe Coffee comes back for that district championship. So that becomes interesting again. And then everyone else is not far behind. Worth County's really good. Part of the problem with them is when they get in trouble, it's mostly caused by themselves with penalties and things like that. Or at least it was against Albany. Platte Valley, really solid team. Still kind of lacking anything dangerous on offense. But I also think their style, that's not really their style. They're going to lean on that great defense. So, yeah, the top 5 is all kind of there. The 6 through 8, 9 kind of stayed the same for me. And 10 just kind of a rotation of teams and how they handle each week, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. The kind of the bottom of the standings kind of changed a little bit this week with King City losing to Worth County the way they did. And I've said this all year about Worth County. They're a team that if you play bad early against, like if you make a couple mistakes, they will boat race you faster than any other top team in the state. They will jump on you so fast. it's ridiculous, but they're going to be maybe easier to beat than an Albany, a North Andrew, a Platte Valley, just because those teams, they might not boat race you as well, but they're going to be so tough to beat after a long game over 4 quarters kind of deal. Just because when you watch North Andrew play, those backs are always falling forward. Their line's always pushing you back kind of deal. They're just so physical with that. They're just so tough to wear down over 4 quarters because they're just going to lean on you the entire time. I think Platte Valley's built the same way, and I think that's kind of the separation that I see with those teams as of right now when it comes to close games and winning those close games versus other top teams. And then you saw East Ashton this last week. They end up dropping or staying at 7, but tying with Oric at this point there. I think the voters, after seeing them kind of struggle with Rockport and just kind of the offensive struggles a bit there in that game, the last second win, gave them a little bit of pause. And then Oric's just been really dominant versus their schedule, which hasn't been the toughest. Their schedule definitely gets tougher here at the end of the season, so we'll see more about them here over the next couple of weeks. And North Shelby kind of the same way. They're rolling through their schedule, but the schedule hasn't been most difficult. They got Keatsville this week, but they have some tougher games coming up here. We'll get a little more of a look on them. And as Anthony said, that 10 spot, King City, Lockwood, Stanberry, St. Paul, even Rockport and Liberal, I think are all teams I consider for that final spot just because they all have different strengths but a lot of flaws at the same time where they're all could beat on each other depending on the matchups. So it's kind of tough to pick a team there in that situation. So, but I mean, there's probably, I would say 15 to 16 teams that are all pretty solid. It's just the difference between 5 and 15 is massive. The difference between 7 and 15 is all pretty close. So that's just kind of what we're looking at right now, where there's 5, maybe 6 true state contenders.
I'd argue 6,
Yeah.
but I'm putting
I
North
keep
County
Drexel in there right now.
Okay,
Yeah.
I was going to say, I didn't know if you were putting Drexel in there. And like you guys talked about, Drexel's the confusing one, right? Like, no one knows without Jacob Coffey what this is going to be. But this week will probably show that a certain extent. I would assume, anyway, when you have 2 top 5 teams like that facing off, and you don't have arguably one of the best players, maybe the best player in the state, not playing.